Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited that you have joined us for the whole day today and that you are continuing to join us for our last official panel, the panel that is about the annual members showcase called When Paper Circulated. We are going to go ahead and pass it right over to Jerushia, who will do the introduction.
All right, well, thank you all for those of you who have made it back from break to When Paper Circulated, the 2022 Annual Members Showcase panel. I'm Jerushia Graham, one of the exhibition committee members, and let's see, I need to share my screen real quick. All right. So for the 2022 conference, we invited all members to participate in the 2022 Members Showcase Annual Exhibition. Members were asked to respond to the conference-related theme, activate materials. The exhibition includes 78 elaborate paper pieces from 28 artists, and the exhibition is online at the NAHP website. And you can see it listed there. This evening, we'll be hearing from 3 of the featured artists. And I'm going to do the bios for all 3 and then have you guys present, and we'll just present in alphabetical order with Lea, Georgie, and then Melissa closing us out. So Lea Basile-Lazarus received a BA in art education from Trenton State College and a MFA with a concentration in printmaking from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Lea is a retired teacher, spending her last 5 years of teaching at a Montessori high school, Beacon Academy in Evanston, Illinois. She has been a recipient of a teacher Fulbright trip to Japan, spending 3 weeks abroad learning about Japan's culture, art, and education system. And through a nonprofit organization called Do Your Part, Lea was sent to Africa to visit Ghanaian schools and villages. Lea has been a printmaker for over 40 years. She makes monotypes, a one-of-a-kind print which incorporates multiple layers of color, shapes, images, and texture. Lea happily owns a Conrad printing press at her home studio in Gig Harbor, Washington. And at the Oxbow School of Art in Michigan, she fell in love with the papermaking process and uses this process to create exciting, colorful paper pulp paintings. Lea annually creates her pulp paintings at Hook Pottery Paper in LaPorte, Indiana. Georgie Cunningham came to papermaking with a background in broadcast and graphic design. She studied papermaking at the Southwest School of Art in San Antonio, Texas, and her work has shown in galleries across the country, including a 20 tapestry show at the Norfolk Botanical Garden in Norfolk, Virginia, which displayed the plants and raw fiber used in the papermaking process. Cunningham is a member of North American Hand Papermakers and International Association of Hand Papermakers and Paper Artists. She works out of her studio in the Texas Hill Country. Melissa Harshman. Melissa Harshman received her MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1992. She has taught at the Lamar Dodd School of Art since 1993. Harshman has exhibited widely throughout the United States and abroad. She was awarded a UGA Senior Faculty Research Grant in 2019 titled Explorations in Papermaking. And she is one of the inaugural Art Lab Fellowship recipients from the University of Georgia for 2022-23. Her work was recently on display at the Hunterton Art Museum in Clinton, New Jersey, in Press Plus. Upcoming exhibitions include When Print Meets Paper at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking in Atlanta, Georgia. And she recently completed the Denbo Fellowship at Pyramid Atlantic Arts Center in Hyattsville, Maryland, focusing on handmade paper. She recently displayed work at the Impact 12 International Printmaking Conference in Bristol, England in September of 2022, and her work can be seen at melissaharshman.com. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Lea. Lea, you're on mute.
Got it. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lea, and I have been a printmaker for almost 50 years. And over the last 7 years, I totally fell in love with papermaking. This year, my summer was, it's not progressing. Oh dear. What's happening? Any thoughts, Jerushia?
Did you stop sharing your screen?
I did just now because I couldn't move my presentation forward. Let's see. I can move it forward that way. Sorry, everybody. Okay, there we go. All right. This year, my summer was filled with art. I was getting ready for a show, at the Evanston Art Center in Evanston, Illinois, which opened July 16th and ran through August 13th. The ironic part of my having a show in Evanston this past summer is that I just had moved away to the Pacific Northwest and a year and a half ago, and I had lived in Evanston for 44 years of the past 44 years. And my name had been in the Evanston Art Center pool forever and never got a call, but I got a call after I moved away. I was grateful, of course, and it was exciting to get ready for a show there. This show incorporated works that I had completed over the past 2 years. The first thing I thought about specifically making for the show was a large painting. I'm not even a painter. That felt right after my week of paper making at Hook Pottery Paper. I'm not a painter, but the way I was making my paper pulp pieces seemed congruent with painting, so I thought I'd give it a whirl. I went for it and started big, 106 inches long by 60 inches. I worked in my garage on unprimed canvas. I actually loved it. But the question was, how was I going to put the show together under one umbrella? The show was going to include the large painting, several pulp paintings, some prints, and a social justice piece that I made this summer by repurposing a lithograph and a paper pulp painting that I made a few years ago. This piece was inspired by the horrific happenings at the beginning of the summer, the Uvalde school shootings and the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I wrote all the names of the Uvalde students and staff that were killed in the mass shooting repeatedly throughout the piece. I wrote what the law Roe versus Wade did for the women of the United States. And I repeatedly wrote the number 233, which were how many deaths were caused by senseless shootings in the United States. I decided to title my show Environments. This title encompassed all of my work from the political and social environments that are constantly present to the natural world that surrounds me in the Pacific Northwest. I am a news junkie, but I give myself plenty of time to enjoy the outside. Cocktail hour often happens on my front deck so that I can admire the sparkle of the sun and water through the enormous trees that protect our property. There is constant beauty, even on the dreariest days. It's always green. But I can't forget the world in which we live. I am constantly bombarded with horror and anger with the horror and anger that surrounds us. So even if I'm reflecting on the beauty that surrounds me, my frenetic mark making is the language I use to express my feeling on the political and social events that are happening nationally and throughout the world. Enough of all that negative stuff. It was a whirlwind getting ready for my show and going back to Evanston for the opening. I taught a printmaking class the day after my opening, and then I packed up everything and went to LaPorte, Indiana to spend 5 days papermaking. I thought I was ready. I had completed a pile of paintings before I went, made some stencils, and I had shipped all my supplies ahead of time. The first day is always truly the hardest. Where do I begin? How do I get mentally and physically ready for my week? Did I remember how to make paper? I hadn't made paper since last year. Was I inspired enough to create a unique and meaningful body of work? The first thing I did after I hugged the dogs and the family was start mixing colors. This process can be meditative. I associate mixing pigmented paper pulp with Japanese and Chinese artists who get their inks ready for sumi-e painting. They spend a lot of time mixing their inks on their stone, contemplating what they will paint and how they will achieve that perfect stroke. I mix color after color, maybe having a reference, possibly a season, a time of day, or an emotion. I try to mix colors that are outside of my comfort zone. The colors that I don't really like are usually the colors that make a difference in the work that I'm creating. So funny how that works. I needed to decide what colors I will start with for my base. This process is thrilling, but extremely frightening all at the same time. A week of challenge laid ahead. No matter how much I think I'm prepared, there is nothing like getting started after pulling 3 sheets of luscious, wet paper, just waiting for me to get my hands onto my stencils and the colors that I've mixed. These next 2 slides are how my week there began. I was inspired by a set of monoprints that I created with my reaction to the war in Ukraine. But at this point, things were still not feeling quite right. After experimenting for a day or so, I found a small sketch of how I saw the tall trees in my yard. It was a view from below, and I had captured it just right. I was also obsessed with the glow that came through the tree at different times of the day as I stand on my front deck. I have been amazed at the interaction between the sun, the water, and the trees. It sparkles and warms your body, even if the air is cool. So that was it. That's what I decided to focus on. And now I needed to get to work. My practice is all about the act of layering pigmented paper pulp on top of pigmented paper pulp, using whatever tools I need to achieve the textures, shapes that I desire. I work on more than one image at a time. And I use stencils made out of hot glue and pellons. These stencils that I make can create identifiable or abstract images. Through the layering process, I can achieve more depth and interest in my work. I use turkey basters, syringes, spoons, or pulp with varying degrees of water mixed with it to achieve my textures. I pour gently, I pour aggressively. I move from one image to another, sometimes moving quickly and other times moving more thoughtfully. This work becomes immediate and spontaneous. My mind is clear of any pre-planned thoughts, and the images grow and develop as I move through the work. I am constantly thinking about the images I'm going to create every day. Images appear in my head, a shape, a texture. These shapes have meanings. They create a story. Sometimes while I'm making a piece, the story runs through my mind. Sometimes I remember the story and sometimes I don't. The technique that I have grown very fond of using over the last 2 years is simple and spontaneous. After I pour several colors over an image that have Pellon stencils on it, I lift the Pellon, and I hope this makes sense. I lift the Pellon off my paper and I flip it over. It has paper pulp on its surface, and I flip it over and I press it either onto one of the pieces that I'm working on, or onto the other couple of pieces that I have that I also work on at the same time. So I'm kind of repurposing paper pulp. And this process, you guys should try it sometime, is amazing. And the textures it creates just make a huge difference in my work. The week was stressful, very intense. I finished about 25 pieces. I knew I wouldn't know if they were completely done until they were dried and sent to me in Washington. The wait was difficult, but I had a sense that I would be adding some finishing touches to them. I don't normally have to do that, but I did say the week was a difficult week. This is a piece completely made of pigmented paper pulp. These trees have such great strength, such beauty, such grace, and such power. I hope that you can see some of these characteristics in the images that I have created. I've spent a couple months now embellishing most of my pieces with oil pastel, colored pencils, paint, and sometimes even some gold leaf. I am happy with this new body of work that reflects the new environment that I live in. We'll see where it goes from here. My thoughts are ever changing. I hope you enjoyed seeing my work and listening to my thoughts. Thank you so much for allowing me to present today at the conference. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lea.
Thank
We'll
you.
hear from Georgie, and we'll do questions after everyone's presented.
Okay.
Hello. Can you see my slideshow?
Not yet.
All right, let's see. Here we go. How's that?
We're still not seeing it.
Oh, all right, wait.
We can see
There
it now.
Yeah,
All
now we
right,
can see
yay.
it.
Okay,
You'll just want to press, yeah, that slideshow button.
okay. Hi, I'm Georgie Cunningham. The concept of activating materials broadly exemplifies papermaking. The history and science of paper is an ongoing story as we face climate change and focus attention on being good land stewards. When I began making paper, I was also studying native grasses in Texas. Making paper with bamboo and esparto in the studio, I began to be curious about our local grasses as a possible fiber source. There are over 11,000 species of grass in the world and more than 500 in Texas. And while not all grass has the cellulose and fiber length to make nice paper, many do. The awns and seeds in grass inflorescence add unexpected natural inclusions. Each grass lends itself to a nuanced set of distinctions. As a papermaker, I strive to open a dialogue between nature and art. Exploring new sources of fiber and including them in my work, I was energized by their diversity and beauty. Paper is a medium as powerful as paint or clay, not just a substrate for something else. I first started exploring paper through my tapestries. I've always loved woven textiles, and I wanted to pursue this look with handmade paper, either by twisting or leaving the paper flat, mostly as paste paper. Growing up in South Texas, I have vivid memories of sunsets on sandy fields of peanuts and cotton, not much green, low dark shadows against an orange sky. This piece on flax was inspired by a visit to Oaxaca during Dia de los Muertos. When you dip a rolled sheet into a vat, it's always exciting to see what you get. The title of this piece comes from the poem Sea Fever from English poet John Masefield. This paper was really fun to work with. Purple Heart sawdust brought out a light pink tinge with flecks of dark red to this sheet of abaca. It almost has the look and feel of fine grit sandpaper. A lot of my recent work is on flax. It was the fiber I had on hand during the peak COVID times. As I worked on my tapestries, I kept thinking about ways to bring the paper off the walls and have it play a more active role in people's lives. Lamps became a way to create a more intimate connection between the viewer, the paper, and the space. The lamp becomes an interactive sculpture that participates in people's day-to-day experience. And light brings a third flexible element to the structure. While pairing wood and paper has always been an unexpected pleasure. Here I chose a heavier Mexican feathergrass paper to alternate with a lighter weight white tridents. My mother returned from a visit to Florida with a suitcase full of pine needles, hoping I would make pine needle paper. They didn't make paper, but they are wonderful inclusions. Here they are with abaca on a mahogany frame. The red trim, oops, wait a minute. There it is. And the red trim is curape. I love the synergy between paper and light. That filtering that illuminates a room, emphasizing the effects of paper fibers. I added a little persimmon dye to the flax to give it a warmer look. I've realized that juxtaposing paper creates an immersive experience as rich as the world the fibers come from. We as paper artists have the unique opportunity to explore both art and science simultaneously. We can continue to shift and grow our palette as we remain aware of the earth around us. Hopefully, in sharing my work and process with you today, I've piqued an interest in local fiber sources, artist footprint, and relationship to place. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie. All right. And last but not least, Alyssa.
Okay, hold on a minute. Can you see my screen? Okay. Okay, can everyone see that and hear me?
Yes, we
Okay. Well, thank you for, I guess, letting me close out the conference. And I really wanted to thank the exhibitions committee and everyone who's made this conference so amazing. And I start with this image. I've been teaching, I took paper making years and years ago at the University of Wisconsin in Madison when I was a grad student, but really hadn't made paper in years. And I teach a freshman seminar with my colleague every year at the University of Georgia, and where we present just the different areas to freshman students. And so I always do the printmaking part, and my colleague Eileen Wallace does the papermaking and book arts part. And so for years, I had seen this amazing image by Michelle Samore that Eileen would present, and always captivated me. And then this is actually a recent picture of me and Jerushia, but inspired by this pulp painting I'd been looking at for years. And then I took an evening papermaking class with Jerushia at the Papermaking Museum in Atlanta. And like the combination of these two things really kickstarted me back into papermaking probably about 4 years ago. Not moving. Let's see. Why am I not moving? Hold on.
You might have to click on the slideshow and then press the button.
Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay. With the advice of my colleague who kind of showed me how to use our Raina beater, this was the summer of 2018, and I took over the papermaking studio at the University of Georgia and just sort of started teaching myself pulp painting. And I took these, you can see these old silk screens that were out of commission, and I had a drawing of a flower. I'd been doing a lot of floral work in my printmaking and wanted to pursue it in papermaking. And I just stuck that drawing under the screen and used that as a guide. So you can see that I made, you can see there's my paper drying out in the sun, and I just made stacks and stacks of these paper dahlia flowers that were then displayed on a large wall at the Goodyear Arts venue in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I titled this piece Joy. I had so much fun teaching myself, or trying to teach myself, how to do this pulp painting. And here are a couple of details. And I would joke with people that I had hot dog vendor hand because my fingers would get sore after hours of squeezing pulp from a ketchup bottle. So you can see the detail on the wall. And then I also had the flowers come out onto the floor. And then I had done a printmaking piece, and then from that was inspired to make these black flowers, which is called For Maud. And this was also inspired by my favorite movie, Harold and Maude. And there's a scene in it where Maude asks Harold, you know, what kind of flower would you like to be? And he holds up this little daisy and he says, one of these. And she says, why? And he says, because they're all alike. And she says, oh, but they're not, you know, some lean to the left, some lean to the right, some are missing petals, you know, all sorts of discernible differences. And then she looks at him and she says, you know, Harold, I think much of the world's sorrow comes from people who are this, and she holds up the individual flower. And then she goes, but allow themselves to be treated like that. And then there's a span to a field of daisies. And so that really inspired this piece, because although, again, I'm making the same flower over and over again, they're all individual and unique and have discernible differences just like we do. And then another shout out to Sue Carey Drummond. In 2019, I got to go to Women's Studio Workshop to take a papermaking workshop with her, learning blowouts and some inclusion things and all sorts of techniques. And I was really excited to get home and try to do some of these great things that she had shown us. But that was the fall. And so I thought my plan was I'll wait until next summer, 2020. I'll take over the printmaking studio again, because it's harder to get in there when we have classes. So I continued pulp painting some pieces at my home studio on silk screens. And this was just an image that sort of came to me, this sort of purple ombre piece. which I had envisioned installing sort of in this big mountainous sort of piece, but didn't really work. So I played around with them and came up with this, which I call Purple Sway. It's about 6 feet long and 4 feet high. So then 2020 did come, and we know we had the pandemic, and I couldn't get into school. It was closed. So I had applied to make this piece called Hope for the Mid-America Print Council Conference that was supposed to take place in the fall of 2020, which was postponed. But I made, and here's a close-up. So basically in 2020, I made over 2,000 of these flowers, these pulp painted flowers, that have poppy seeds embedded in them. The idea being you could take one of these flowers and plant them, and then new poppies would grow. So this piece is actually on display now at the MAPC conference in Kent, Ohio, which was delayed until now, fall of 2022. So then I was back in my studio and I started just pulp painting flowers. This is in 2020 still. I spent a lot of time at home during the pandemic and out in my garden, and I love flowers. So I just started kind of playing around, and my idea was I was gonna fill a gallery wall with this like big wildflower garden. So I started pinning these to my studio, but somehow I didn't really like the result wasn't what I anticipated. So I took these purple flowers, which are Liriope, and I made them into new configurations. So this piece is about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. And then I did the same thing with this piece called Daffodil Wheel. So I love daffodils in the many varieties. So this is about 5 feet in diameter. Then came, we're moving up to 2021 in the fall, and my dad passed away. And I was there with him when he passed and when he took his last breath. And around the same time, I was invited by Georgia Deal to be in a show at the Robert C. Williams Papermaking Museum called When Print Meets Paper, which is upcoming. And so I was thinking about what to do for that show. And I had this vision. I did this little drawing. And what I came up with were these relief prints that are then on a hand papermaking base with the hand papermaking threads attaching them. And I really think that moment of a last breath was so profound. And it made me think of like yogic breathing, where you breathe in and you inhale, and then there's a pause, and then you exhale, and there's a pause. And that pause is really neither an exhale or an inhale. So I was thinking about that moment of the last breath where there really is no inhale or exhale. So that's what the line sort of represented to me. And then I made this piece titled 89 Years. And this is also sort of a memorial and dedicated to my dad. He was 89 when he passed. So I made 89 pulp painted sheets of paper that are all individual and unique, and then silk screened a white chrysanthemum on each one. White chrysanthemum in many cultures is a symbol when you're in mourning and grief, and they're often used at funerals. So that's why they were silk screened onto these prints. And then I finally, this past summer, did get back into the printmaking studio at UGA, and I really got back to trying to do some of these blowouts and different processes I had learned back at Women's Studio Workshop. So again, I was working with these white chrysanthemums. So these are cotton blowouts on abaca sheets. And I had actually seen this amazing papermaking sheet piece on Instagram that is hung from the ceiling and kind of cascades down. And so I've made many of each of these. And the idea being that I'll sew these together and have them kind of cascade and flow from the floor to the ceiling. And the holes in the abaca allow the paper to be a little more flexible and to hopefully cascade the way I want them to. I haven't quite put this piece together yet. But then after I made that piece, I took one of the white chrysanthemums and sort of blew them up into a large scale piece. So this is again cotton blowout on abaca substrate. And you can see that from the wrinkling. And so each of these segments is 11 by 14. So the final piece is 55 by 77. And then I was fortunate to be able to go to Pyramid Atlantic on the Denbo Fellowship, where I could focus some more on paper making. So when I first got there, I played around with this round paper mold and more blowouts with the white on black and the black on white paper. But I also wanted to experiment with some things that I had never done there. So the photograph of me on the left there, they have some amazing molds and decals there, and I had never made a piece of paper this long or this big. So I played with that and doing some pulp painting on that. And then another one of my goals in going to Pyramid was to beat linen, which I had never done, and do some pulp painting with linen. So here are a couple of examples that I was experimenting with while I was there. And then this brings me to my most recent piece that I've been working on. I started this on August 21st, which was the anniversary of my dad's passing. And I thought I would do this piece called Mood Ring. And the idea is to, like, I don't know if you all were little and had mood rings, and they would change colors supposedly on like what your mood was. And so my idea is to make a piece of paper every day, and the color of the paper would be based on my mood that day. My goal, so this is where I am this far. I actually have 7 more black pieces in my drawing box in my studio. So I'm hoping for a few more green days now, but I'm hoping to do this piece for a year. And so if anyone has a place where we can display a really large piece in a year, let me know. But that is the last slide I wanted to show. And I wanted to thank you all for letting me sort of round out the conference.
Thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. And while people are kind of getting their questions together, I do have a few for you all. Lea, you mentioned it very quickly in your presentation, but I don't know that a lot of people are using the hot glue as a stencil. Can you talk a little bit about that? Gotta unmute yourself.
I don't think I'm ever going to learn to unmute myself, really. Sorry about that. The hot glue, Andrea Peterson introduced me to hot glue. And I started doing it because I was really involved in text from the Women's March posters. And when I went to work at her studio, she was like, Lea, not everyone needs to read every word that you want to say. She said, why don't we experiment with drawing with hot glue? And that's kind of how it started. And I've continued doing it for the last 4 years, 5 years. And all it is drawing whatever you want. Those flowers would look great drawn with hot glue. It's difficult. Your hand gets really tired, but I draw on glass and I let it dry, and then it's stiff. And what I've found is that I can use it as a block out on my paper pieces. I can roll ink on it and press it on my prints, roll it through the press. And I can also use the hot glue for embossing. So I use it now for all 3 purposes, and it's so diverse and it's so much fun, and you can cut it up and it will rip and you'll still use it. It's just a fun tool to use as a stencil.
Georgie, I was curious about the first pieces that you showed with the woven pieces in the center. Mm-hmm. Are you weaving those and then pressing them into?
No,
what's the construction there?
I cut a warp or a weft within a sheet of handmade paper, and then I weave into it with paste paper.
Gotcha.
And wax linen thread.
One other question, because I noticed that on one of your pieces you had a lightly twisted paper, but it was the only one.
Do you know how hard it is to twist that much paper, Jerushia? Talk about sore hands. Yeah, I don't do it often, but I do like the effect. And yes. Thank you.
And Melissa, again, coming back to construction. So I was curious with the chrysanthemums. I think that's the purple. Can you guys tell I have no botanical knowledge, but like once you get your formation, are you keeping those pieces separate? Or are you setting them so that that's the only way that those particular pieces can be hung, like the sway piece, the yeah. I know
No.
some of them are modular.
Yeah, most of them are, and they're just pinned to the wall. Like each of those little pieces, purple flower pieces, the liriope from it's from monkey grass, are actually individually pinned to the wall. So, every time I put it up, it's probably going to be a little different, especially the dandelion. I mean, I would say dandelion, daffodil. The daffodil wheel, it's just however I happen to put them up. I mean, I'll probably keep them in that circle, but they could be reconfigured into something else.
Is that because just easier to like travel and respond to different spaces, or do you ever mix, like, okay, I've made this piece with these parts, but do you ever remix? Like, I'm going to take these parts in something else that I've made and do a completely different combination?
I actually did that with some prints. I had a piece configured one way and then I totally reconfigured it a different way, rehung it differently, but I could, yeah. I mean, I see like the daffodil wheel just being sort of, I really like the way that looks when it comes together. Same thing with the liriope, but there's nothing that says they might not show up someday some other way. And partly, I have a small studio. I'm working in my garage, when I'm not at school, which is not that big. And so I think I've been attracted to working in small modular ways because I can then make a big piece on a wall, but I can store it and ship it in a very small container. And also I don't have huge walls in my studio, to put things up. I've thought about trying to sew them together, but my skills aren't that good. So I think for right now, it's not that difficult to put them up. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not that difficult. So I think space is sort of an issue of both the size of my studio, and it's literally easier to pack them up in a little box, once I take them down.
Let's see it.
Can I ask a question? Hi, everyone. And thank you so much. First of all, I'm honored that work with all of you. Melissa, you were my professor, and the way you work and like all your exhibitions, you always inspire me a lot. And thank you for being here. And so my question is, have you ever think about the changing of the color on the background? I mean, the wall that you're hanging your work. Do you want them to like always be white, or you prefer to have different colors on the background? Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, thanks, Sanaz. That's a really good question. I did that very purposely with a different sort of print installation ones where like the wall became part of it. And I've thought about that. I think I tend to photograph them in my studio and it's a white wall, so they end up being white. If I had total control, I think it would be really fun to actually paint something in the back, like maybe a shape that's a different color that might interact with some of the floral pieces, or even like I think actually with some of the the white on white pieces I've been doing lately would be really nice, even on a gray, but usually I'm just photographing them at school or my studio just so I can get a good image of them. But I think that that's a really fun idea of having the wall become part of it with different colors. I just haven't done it, but except in one piece, but I think that's a great idea.
We've got a few questions in the chat. It says, with a few mentions of printmaking throughout the presentation, I'm curious if any of you have thought about papermaking as kinds of prints. I'm thinking of Jose Roca's article about printmaking being defined as needing just a matrix, transfer medium, and a receiving surface.
I'll respond to that a little bit. I don't know Jose Roca's work and article, so I'll have to read it. I have always been a printmaker, and this paper making, like I said, came out of nowhere for me. And I feel like they are so similar. It's opposites, right? For printmaking, I'm inking up a matrix or a stencil. And often in paper making, I'm using that matrix or stencil as a block out, right? But they do transfer back and forth. And really, I make monotypes, so they are one of a kind, and my paper pieces are one of a kind also. And you don't always need a matrix for your pieces. If you did a paper pulp piece with in all a painterly style, you wouldn't have a matrix. And in printmaking also, if you did a whole piece without a matrix, with just painterly style, it would be a monoprint without a stencil or without a matrix. So I think papermaking and printmaking go hand in hand. It's probably why so many artists like both processes and can do both processes successfully.
Just in response, they said they were thinking the mold was also like a matrix.
It is, absolutely.
And Georgie, you have a question from Terry Power. When you are making paper from grasses that don't have a lot of fibrous leaves, do you add abaca to make the sheets work better?
No, actually, all of the native grass paper I work with is really strong and doesn't need any help. I might, if I have a grass that I like, and I want to use it as an inclusion because of the awns or the seeds, I'll do that. But most of these grasses that I work with are really strong, and they don't need any additional help. If Terry, yes, is interested, I have on my website, I have a blog dedicated to working with native grasses, and they're generally native to a lot of states, not just Texas. So, and there's a photograph of the grass and a photograph of the paper, and then just notes about how I came about the paper. So you might want to check that.
Well, I know I'm definitely going to be checking that out. Do we have any other questions? I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Yeah.
I wouldn't mind jumping in and asking, or Sanaz, sorry, you raised your hand if you want to ask a question first.
Yeah, I just want one more question about from Lea, how you storage that big piece that you showed. It was like 100 inches.
Well,
can you roll it up? Can you?
I rolled it up and I actually shipped it. To Evanston folded, and it was perfectly fine. It's not primed, so I'm using raw canvas so that a lot of the acrylic paint soaked into the fabric. But yes, you can roll it up. And my house is set up that I have this great big cedar wall when you walk in. So now it's hanging in my house. So I don't need to store it, but you could store it very easily, just rolled up.
Thanks.
Lea, I just wanted to say that I feel very inspired by your hot glue stencily thing. I don't even really, I'm not even sure how you do it, but I'm going to try it. But also,
It's not that hard. So you will have so much fun with it. Because when I first saw your paper pulp flowers, I was like, oh, is that like colored hot glue? It's not going to be, it doesn't flow as easily as paper pulp does, but it's something that you can use over and over again. And again, you're going to use it kind of as the opposite. You might be pouring around that hot glue floral stencil. So I think it's going to open up and then you can layer and layer and layer. Oh, you're going to have so much fun.
Because I've used hot glue a long time ago, actually, to make a plate and ink it up. But I think this is very exciting. And then the other thing that you said, which is kind of like it's festering right now in the back of my mind, is
embossments. No,
well, you were talking about these Pellon
strips,
stencils that then would have paper pulp in them, and then you would pick them up, and it sounds to me like you said you would turn them over, and then that would go on to some. And I think that just sounds very exciting as well, to get these spontaneous marks that.
And they're great marks, and you're kind of like repurposing, right? You're using all the paper pulp that you used. So again, that's been this summer. I used it a ton. And I did ask Andrea, I said, do other people do this? She goes, not really. You know, it's people do it a little bit, but you do it more than anyone I've seen. And it just makes great effects. And they're all surprises. So it's a lot of fun.
Beth, you had a question?
Sure. I was just hoping to ask, especially with pieces that are like surrounding like political activism or environmental activism or like working with grief and stuff like that. I was just hoping that all of you might elaborate a little bit more on what you hope that the viewers take away and what you hope the viewers' next steps are after encountering your work.
I'll respond because I just had I was just part of a open studio tour in Gig Harbor, and I had a woman come and stand in front of my political piece for a really long time. And she was in awe that I had captured all of these names and all of these numbers. And I knew that it wouldn't be a piece that was going to get sold, but I knew it was also a really important piece for everyone that walked in. So I guess when I make political pieces, of course I want a reaction from my audience, and everyone will react differently, right? And sometimes when I make political pieces, they may not be apparent to the audience. The audience may see it as something different, right? And sometimes the title will help that. And other times you just have to let it be. The audience will read it as they're going to read it. I have to tell people to look at the writing on the piece that I made because it's gold and it's just a sea of words and letters and numbers. So you have to really get close to it. So you want a person to stop. I want a person to stop and think and go, yes, how can I make a difference? So I want my audience to look at it and realize that these are huge topics and they need to be addressed.
Lea, being from Texas, I was quite moved. Uvalde is just a few miles from here. And I kind of caught my breath. I think that's wonderful. My work isn't political, but I think of my tapestries as being meditative. And I like it when people stop and get caught up with the texture and in the color and don't look for meaning, don't look for an image, and just stand there and breathe. The yoga breath that, who was it that said earlier, it's just a time to relax and step back and enjoy color and movement. But thank you for the Uvalde piece.
You're welcome.
Also, I just wanted to say real quick about yours, Georgie, before Melissa, you answer. I think also because you are choosing the grasses and things like that, then I think inherently people will start thinking about the environment and about their natural, like where they currently are and the materials that are used. So I think that it does definitely touch on that as well.
I hope so. Thank you.
Right. And I think with some of my pieces, there's I'm probably going to botch the line, but there's a line in the color purple that I think of a lot when I'm out in the world. And I think it's when Shug Avery is saying, I think it pisses God off when you walk by the color purple and don't notice it. And when I'm out and about in the world, I try to notice. I love flowers, so I notice them anyway, but I try to notice things. And I'm always going, oh, look, that tree over there is trying to get my attention. You know, I think of that a lot. So I try to pay attention. And I think my senses were definitely heightened during the pandemic when I was home all the time. I think because I was allowing myself to be outside and in nature more. And my pace of my life was so much slower because I was staying at home. And so when I was doing the floral imagery, when I was reconfiguring them, I was hoping people would then notice maybe things they walk by all the time that they don't quite notice, because I was presenting it in such an unusual way that they might notice the daffodils a little bit more as they walk by them on their way to work or when they're leaving their school or something. The pieces about my dad, someone might not know exactly what I'm getting at if I haven't talked about it, but like the 89 years one to me was so important because it's so symbolic, like each one being a year of his life, I guess. But the fact that, again, noticing like it's circular, life is circular, that kind of idea, and that they're all different and they have imperfections just like we do. So there were a couple, some sheets didn't dry the way I wanted them to, and they became a different piece. But and as a printmaker who, when I'm doing my prints, I want my paper perfect. I don't like wrinkles in the paper. I don't like creases, and it kind of drives me crazy. So when I'm doing paper making, I have to let go of a lot of sort of expectations I have when I'm in the print studio, and learning to enjoy and appreciate the crinkles and the slight imperfections that paper has. And so for me, that really represents sort of a life well lived. So those pieces that were really in honor of my dad they had very symbolic things to me. And I don't know why, but those thin paper, bridges were how I was visualizing from the last breath to no breath. And I don't know if people would get that, but a few people who had recently had a death in their family sort of got it. But if you're just looking at it, you might wonder. But I thought like connections between life and death and growth and decay, and a lot of analogies, I think, between the two flowers that were connected.
Thank you all for sharing your work. It's very inspiring. I know that Beth and Kyle probably have some final words, but I did want to show, let's see, I'm trying to share my screen. Just a few more things before we go. So this talk and the exhibition are put on by the exhibitions committee, and the shows and the things that we do are really to do just what this talk did: inspire, promote, excite folks about paper. So we ask that you guys keep participating, keep answering those calls. We will be doing a call for the 2023 Jewelry exhibition titled Sustainability in Chaos. And the details of that will be coming soon. So keep an eye out for the NAHP newsletter, as well as our social media and on our website. Let's see. And the thing that makes this all happen, this conference and all the different activities that are offered to you all as members, is participation in the administrative part as well. So we strongly encourage that you volunteer for committees. Many hands make short work, right? And then other ways to get involved. So please, when you see us putting out calls on social media, to share those calls. If you're educators, share them with your students. If you're an artist or another creative, continue to share that with your communities. Consider being a liaison for NAHP exhibitions coming to a venue near you. So if you know of a space that you think would be great, maybe reaching out to them, letting them know about us, and you know, we can get more information to you or to them about what shows are available. We also accept curatorial proposals. So in the triennial cycle, we have the collegiate triennial, we have the juried exhibition. We also have a guest curated show that cycles every 3 years. So on our website, on the exhibition pages, you can find a form to fill out if you have an idea for a show that you'd like to curate. Again, submit to the calls and purchase the exhibit catalogs. I'm sorry, I'm having so much trouble advancing. Congratulations to all of our members that participated this year. It's always exciting to see the work, and you guys can take another look at it if you didn't get to see it, or if you did and you just really enjoy and want to see it again or share it with someone. It's on our website. And lastly, and I have to say, Sanaz put this slide together, and she's the only one missing off of the slide. But thank you to the exhibitions committee for, you know, making all of the stuff that's happened this year in terms of shows and calls come together. So I will pass back to Beth and Kyle. And Beth and Kyle, thank you guys so much. It's been really enjoyable conference.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for presenting today as well. And again, yes, please check out the website for the exhibitions to see all of them, as well as the Letters Are Not Dead and the 8th Collegiate Triennial.